Ladies and gentlemen, I want to begin with a simple question. Have you ever wondered why powerful nations change their stance on an issue after decades of silence? It is never just about politics. It is about pressure, survival, and the hidden forces shaping our world. When the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia suddenly take a new position on Palestine, it is not just a headline, it is a signal that the world we knew is no longer the same, a signal that even the strongest nations cannot escape the weight of shifting power, public opinion, and strategic rivalry. You see, in business or in politics, big decisions are rarely made out of kindness. They are made out of necessity. And if you look closely, you will see the invisible hands. Geopolitics, economics, alliances, and domestic politics, all pushing leaders to act. Today, I invite you to look deeper than the headlines, to ask not what happened, but why it happened. Because understanding the hidden pressure behind these decisions is the key to understanding where the world is heading. Stay with me until the end of this talk, and you will see the full picture, not just of Palestine's recognition, but of the future balance of global power, the role of ordinary citizens like you and me, and why this moment may be remembered as a turning point in history. The first point revolves around the geopolitical shifts that are quietly but powerfully reshaping the global order. For much of the post-World War II era, international politics was defined by a bipolar world dominated first by the United States and the Soviet Union, and later by a unipolar system in which the US stood unrivaled as the singular global superpower. That era is fading. Today, we are witnessing the rise of a multipolar world, one where influence and power are distributed across several centers. China has become a dominant economic force and is extending its diplomatic and security reach into regions such as Africa and the Middle East. Russia, despite its economic constraints, remains a key strategic player with the capacity to disrupt and influence global politics. Regional powers like Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and even India are asserting themselves with increasing confidence, no longer content to play passive roles in global affairs. In such a shifting environment, countries like the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia find themselves recalibrating their foreign policies. Their traditional reliance on the US and Europe as the compass for international action is now complicated by the emergence of other players who are reshaping narratives, building alliances, and challenging the old order. The question of Palestine, long considered frozen or too politically sensitive to address, is suddenly taking on new importance. The global South, particularly Arab and majority nations, has grown more united and vocal in its demands for justice and recognition of Palestinian statehood. Ignoring this collective voice is no longer viable for Western governments that wish to maintain influence in regions critical for energy, trade, and strategic partnerships. Moreover, this shift is not only about global power, but also about legitimacy. In a world where emerging powers are presenting themselves as defenders of fairness, justice, and sovereignty, Western nations risk losing moral ground if they continue to appear indifferent to the plight of Palestinians. Recognition or policy change becomes a tool to maintain relevance and to signal adaptability in a multipolar system. Thus, the move by the UK, Canada, and Australia can be seen as more than a moral gesture. It is a strategic response to a changing geopolitical reality in which clinging to outdated alignments could mean losing both influence and credibility. Economic and trade interests play a decisive role in shaping how nations like the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia position themselves on global issues, including Palestine. While foreign policy often appears to be rooted in values and principles, the reality is that economic imperatives frequently drive the final outcome. The Middle East, for instance, remains one of the most strategically valuable regions in the world due to its energy reserves, trade routes, and investment opportunities. For Western economies that face growing competition, securing long-term energy partnerships and access to markets is not a matter of choice. It is a matter of survival. The United Kingdom has long relied on the Gulf states for energy stability and as destinations for arms exports and financial services. Its recognition of Palestine cannot be separated from the need to balance these relationships while also preparing for a future in which the region's younger generation increasingly demands justice for Palestine. Canada, while geographically distant, has vast economic ties with the region through its energy sector and diaspora communities. Its leaders understand that ignoring the Palestinian question risks undermining credibility in markets that are vital for trade and cooperation. Australia, too, is eyeing stronger trade connections with the Middle East and North Africa, particularly as it diversifies away from overdependence on China. Another dimension lies in global trade routes. The Middle East serves as a bridge between Europe, Asia, and Africa. Decisions made about Palestine and the broader region affect not only moral standing, but also the flow of commerce, shipping security, and investment opportunities. As competition intensifies, Western nations cannot afford to alienate key regional partners by appearing blind to an issue that defines much of the Arab and Muslim world's political agenda. Financial partnerships and sovereign wealth funds also carry significant weight. Gulf nations, including Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, are deploying billions in global investments, from infrastructure to technology. Countries seeking to attract these funds understand the political sensitivities tied to Palestine. A gesture of recognition, therefore, signals alignment with the expectations of these economic partners. Ultimately, economics weaves through every layer of diplomacy. By recognizing Palestine, the UK, Canada, and Australia are not merely expressing solidarity with the people, but safeguarding their positions in an increasingly competitive global economy where silence on such a defining issue could carry heavy financial and strategic costs. The alignment of the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia with larger powers such as the United States and the European Union has always been a defining element of their foreign policy. These nations operate within an interconnected framework where loyalty to alliances often shapes decisions as much as national interest. When it comes to Palestine, their positions cannot be fully understood without acknowledging the pressure and expectations exerted by Washington and Brussels. The United States remains the most influential player in the Western Bloc, and its stance toward Israel and Palestine carries significant weight in shaping the responses of its closest allies, Even when differences emerge, the need to maintain solidarity within this alliance often leads these countries to carefully calibrate their policies to avoid open contradiction. The European Union, too, exerts its influence through collective foreign policy goals and trade partnerships. For the UK, despite Brexit, alignment with European allies on major global issues remains an important marker of legitimacy and relevance. For Canada and Australia, while geographically distant, maintaining harmony with both the EU and the US helps secure trade, defense, and diplomatic cooperation. This interconnectedness creates an environment in which independent policy stances are possible, but rarely pursued if they risk fracturing alliances that are central to security and prosperity. In recent years, however, the geopolitical situation has placed increasing strain on Western unity. The war in Ukraine, tensions in East Asia, and instability in the Middle East have made alliance cohesion even more critical. Recognition of Palestine, or even a shift toward acknowledging Palestinian rights, becomes not just an act of foreign policy, but a statement of alignment with evolving transatlantic priorities. As public opinion and international pressure build, the US and EU themselves face calls to recalibrate their stance, and once they signal flexibility, allied nations are expected to follow suit. At the same time, these pressures operate quietly, often behind closed doors. Diplomatic cables, high-level visits, and policy briefings create an undercurrent of expectation that shapes how decisions unfold. Leaders in London, Ottawa, and Canberra are well aware that diverging too sharply from US or EU direction could risk losing not only political goodwill, but also tangible benefits such as defense support, intelligence sharing, and favorable trade negotiation. Thus, the recognition of Palestine reflects less a sudden moral awakening and more a carefully managed alignment within a wider Western strategy to maintain cohesion in a rapidly changing global environment. Public opinion and human rights considerations have become increasingly powerful forces in shaping the policies of Western democracies. And the issue of Palestine highlights this shift clearly. In the past, foreign policy decisions were largely managed by political elites and often insulated from mass sentiment. Today, the rise of digital media, grassroots activism, and an engaged global youth has eroded that insulation. For the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia, the voices of their own citizens are now impossible to ignore. Protests, online campaigns, and international solidarity movements place constant pressure on governments to align their foreign policies with the values they profess to uphold. In Europe, for example, protests in major cities draw tens of thousands who demand justice for Palestine and call out perceived double standards in applying principles of human rights and self-determination. Canada, with its large and diverse immigrant population, experiences similar pressure, where communities expect their leaders to acknowledge and respect the struggles of Palestinians. In Australia, universities and civil society organizations have amplified awareness of global injustice, turning Palestine into a domestic moral issue as much as an international one. These movements are not isolated or temporary. They reflect a broader shift in how younger generations interpret fairness, equality, and global responsibility. Human rights advocacy has also become institutionalized in ways that make ignoring it politically costly. Non-governmental organizations, international watchdogs, and even UN bodies regularly release reports documenting conditions in Palestine, creating a constant flow of evidence that challenges governments to respond. When leaders fail to act, they face criticism not only from activists, but also from their own legislatures, media, and in some cases, their political opponents. The credibility of Western democracies, which often lecture the world about freedom and justice, becomes questioned when they appear indifferent to Palestinian suffering. Social media amplifies this pressure even further. Images, videos, and testimonies from conflict zones reach global audiences instantly, creating a sense of moral urgency among citizens who demand that their governments act. Unlike in earlier eras, narratives cannot be easily controlled, and silence now risks being perceived as complicity. Governments of democratic nations must balance diplomatic alliances with the expectations of the people, and in the case of Palestine, those expectations are growing louder. Leaders in London, Ottawa, and Canberra know that ignoring this groundswell of public opinion could weaken their legitimacy at home and diminish their image as defenders of human rights abroad. Strategic rivalries are at the heart of why the positions of the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia on Palestine are evolving. The world is no longer defined by Western dominance alone. It is increasingly shaped by the assertiveness of other global powers, most notably China and Russia, who are building deeper ties with the Middle East. Both powers recognize the region's significance, not just as a source of energy, but as a hub of influence connecting Asia, Africa, and Europe. In this environment, Western countries are compelled to rethink how they engage with Middle Eastern issues, including Palestine, because failure to do so leaves a vacuum for rivals to exploit. China's strategy, for example, has been to expand economic and diplomatic influence through initiatives like the Belt and Road, while simultaneously presenting itself as a neutral partner in conflicts where Western nations are often seen as biased. By offering infrastructure, investment, and a rhetoric of fairness, Beijing positions itself as an alternative mediator on the Palestinian issue, winning goodwill from Arab and Muslim-majority nations. Russia, on the other hand, leverages its military involvement in the region, as seen in Syria, and its role on the UN Security Council to maintain relevance. Both powers use the question of Palestine to highlight Western double standards, portraying themselves as defenders of sovereignty and justice. For the UK, Canada, and Australia, this presents a dilemma. Remaining aligned solely with the traditional Western stance risks losing credibility among countries that are increasingly open to Chinese or Russian partnerships. Recognition of Palestine, or at least signaling greater sympathy, becomes a way to counterbalance rival narratives and reassure Middle Eastern nations that Western powers are not entirely indifferent to their concerns. In a multipolar world, soft power matters as much as hard power, and appearing detached from global calls for Palestinian rights undermines Western influence in critical regions. These rivalries are also linked to larger strategic contests over trade, technology, and security. Middle Eastern nations hold leverage because their partnerships can tilt balances in areas far beyond oil. By supporting Palestine, Western allies aim to strengthen diplomatic ties that prevent rivals from monopolizing influence. Thus, decisions taken in London, Ottawa, and Canberra are not only about Palestine itself, but about positioning in the broader global context, where every gesture carries weight in determining who shapes the future international order. Domestic politics play an undeniable role in how the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia approach the issue of Palestine. While foreign policy is often portrayed as a matter of international strategy, leaders in democratic systems must always keep an eye on the mood within their own borders. Public opinion, community dynamics, and electoral calculations are powerful forces that influence whether a government chooses to act or remain silent on contentious global matters. In each of these countries, the presence of significant immigrant and diaspora communities adds another layer of complexity. For example, Canada has a sizable Arab and Muslim population whose expectations on Palestine cannot be overlooked by any government hoping to maintain trust and representation. So in Australia, diverse communities, including Palestinians, Lebanese, and others from the Middle East, have built strong voices in politics and civil society, pushing their concerns into mainstream debate. The UK, with its long history of immigration from former colonies, faces similar pressures, where communities expect fairness and recognition of historical grievances. Elections heighten the stakes. Political parties weigh how their stances on Palestine will resonate with different segments of voters. Supporting recognition can appeal to younger and more progressive demographics who view the issue through the lens of human rights, while hesitation risks being seen as outdated or indifferent. At the same time, parties must also navigate the sensitivities of maintaining strong ties with Israel, whose influence and alliances remain significant in domestic politics. Leaders find themselves walking a tightrope, responding to moral pressure from voters while avoiding backlash from powerful interest groups and international partners. Another domestic factor is the role of media and political narratives. Coverage of conflict in Gaza or the West Bank sparks intense debates on talk shows, in newspapers, and online platforms, creating an environment in which silence is no longer sustainable. Politicians who fail to address the issue risk accusations of hypocrisy, particularly when their governments promote human rights abroad. Rival parties often seize these moments to score political points, framing recognition of Palestine as a test of values and credibility. Thus, the recognition of Palestine is not purely a foreign policy calculation, but also a domestic balancing act. Leaders in London, Ottawa, and Canberra know that their choices will resonate deeply with their citizens, shaping not only their international image, but their political futures at home. Ladies and gentlemen, what we see today in the decisions of the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia is not the result of a single moment, but the outcome of many forces converging: geopolitical shifts, economic necessity, alliance expectations, public demands, strategic rivalries, and the dynamics of domestic politics. Recognition of Palestine may be framed as a moral stand, but it also reflects the weight of pressure and the calculations of survival in a changing world. The true test, however, lies ahead. Recognition alone will not create justice or peace. It is only the first step. What matters now is whether these nations, and indeed all of us, can turn symbolic gestures into meaningful action that ensures dignity, fairness, and stability for generations to come. I wish you all the courage to think critically, to question narratives, and to stand for principles that outlast politics. May you find clarity in complexity and strength in moments of uncertainty. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your openness to reflect on these issues. Good luck, and may your efforts always lead toward truth and peace.